Hey everybody, BTO Pro here, and today I'm going to do something I haven't done in a very long time. I'm going to do a live code review. So if you haven't been paying attention, I've got several students working with us this summer. Super pumped about it. I refer to them as haX-Force. Don't worry, it's not copyrighted. X-Force, however, from Deadpool 2 is. However, their first, work in web components as a team, if you will, is to go and build their own card. And the card can be about anything. And then we've been kind of going back and forth, iterating code reviews, posting issues, whatever. So I'm going to check out Dreaming Felicia's card here. And part of this is also to illustrate the importance of using unified tooling. Now, the things that are being worked on are largely being done with a project called OpenWC. The reason I recommend people use OpenWC is just from a developer experience, copy and paste this command, get going, and then be able to ingest someone else's web component that you have no context of how it was built and basically understand all the conventions out of the box. So as I keep emphasizing to them, once you know how to read one component written in vanilla JavaScript or lit element or Polymer, Skate, any of the rest, then you basically can read any of them. So let's dive in. I am going to go to the repo. Was sent. We're going to clone this, copy. I like to organize my file system based on having Git projects in general. I have stuff in SVN and just like non-Git projects for legacy into a directory structure like this. So I'll do git clone. And then, so the first thing I probably do is when they're singular elements, I do always place them as the top level. So in this case, I can't just go run yarn install. It won't mean anything. So from a developer experience perspective, I do like to have it just be you dive in and that's what you're working on. For context, in LRN web components, you can run yarn install from this level, but all of the elements are under a directory called elements. So you can see these kind of two concepts, right? The mono repo, which is the monolithic approach to this, where we've got all these elements in one place. We need them to be individually organized versus singular element. I clone it and I just work on it. If we're going with the clone it and just work on it, I would probably keep this stuff at the top level. Some of this stuff is gonna be super nitpicky, but as you'll find, JavaScript development communities are pretty fickle. It's like, I didn't know how to install this, so I didn't even bother. Or there's a lot of files on the file system. I've gotten that one before. Anyway, so we're gonna do cp some card, yarn install, and yarn start. And then, so we've got this Squidward card, which is awesome, Felicia. I absolutely love this transition. I have fired this element up and I read the blog post. So the first thing I noticed is just from a accessibility standpoint, the color contrast is perfect, right? I mean, obviously, it's black and white, not a huge deal. I do love the notion of like these two modes, and I can hover to get to this. So some things that are a little bit like, how do we deal with this issue? One, I can't get to this text. Now, if it's what shows up here, which it appears to be, then that's fine. However, I also can't activate that effect if I tab through the material. And so there's no ability to highlight this, which is an accessibility issue in the event that this additional material had some other connotation to it. So those are the things I'm immediately looking for before I even dive into the code of the element is how does this function? How can I interface with it? If I'm an end user, what am I doing with this? I do love this. I don't know where you got this CSS transition effect from with the slide out, slide in, and slide up. Love that. So I can't wait to see how that's actually done. So then as part of my general development practice, I open up another prompt to the same place. I do code space period, which is a nice shortcut with VS Code. It's just going to invoke VS Code at that direct file or folder tree level. And you'll excuse me, it's early morning on a Monday, so. Oh, Death Wish coffee. Death Wish coffee is fantastic. That's not what's in here, but anyway. All right, so let's move my dumb face over there. Okay, so we see we got demo, node modules, SRC, another convention in general, and I'm going to say for my own purposes, the other projects we do, we usually have a lib directory as well, and that's kind of for the library of things affiliated with this exact project. don't have anything to tell you like that's the way this should be done. It's just generally the way that we've aligned with things. One thing I don't love about OpenWC and the way it structures this, I will say, is it has an individual import statement from something, and then window.customelements.define. Now, I know why they do this. It's to help with some bundlers and things. And you can see there's also the index.js that just exports that, right? So that you can kind of abstract the custom element definition and call off of window from the rest of it. I might get bit on this personally because we do put window.customelements.define in our elements directly. And 99.9% of context, that doesn't matter. However, as we are, I've said, unfortunately, for like 2 years, we're in the process of building a desktop app. Well, we're building things in a way that they will transition to a desktop app flawlessly. We may need to make some tweaks as a result of that. But anyway, so we'll dive into some card here. Now, coffee. Okay, so for starters, this is not where this project lives. And so this is definitely a confusing thing for new developers. And there's nothing wrong with doing it this way at all. However, new developers, I think, are going to start to say, lit element and this stuff appears. Now, the reason this works at all is purely tooling based. So if I were to go to this, we can see there's lit-element.ts. That's the TypeScript file for it. The reason that works in any way is in package.json, there is main and module, and the tooling is going to read off of this file and go, oh, you actually mean this. And so when you are just pointing to /lit element, there's a leap of faith associated with the tooling to pick it up and actually point to the right file. Now, part of the idea behind that from a tooling perspective is, allow the creator of that project to change where that lives. I just don't personally subscribe to that. I like to try and keep things as close to the platform, and by platform, I mean web itself, as close to the web itself as possible. I don't want any magic tooling workflow that, eventually will do something like this. This will, when it gets compiled, you'll end up with something like that. So it'll add on that node modules, or add on this lit-element.js. Again, what's going on here is not wrong by any means. I just personally like to use what's called bare imports and declarations, which is directly to the thing. But then I also like to actually say, I am pulling in this specific JavaScript file. That's just preference. Don't need to do things that way, but that is the way that I end up doing them. Anyway, then we're going to have styles coming out of here. And then this is just a preference thing on our part. This is an array. And so I usually, and I've been told by Justin Fajani on some Twitter threads, this isn't really that important, but personally, I like to pass these around as arrays. Apparently lit element can, figure it out either way, but I do like to do it this way because in the future, you could potentially just export and import all of this CSS as an object and then pass the object into an array of items. Again, that's a minor thing, something we do. So first thing I notice is panning through here. This is a good extrapolation of this and CSS naming convention or variable naming convention, right? So a lot of times we're going not exclusively off of what Cassandra Roberts and Red Hat are doing as far as naming convention of these things, but I am trying to stick to what some of what they do with the Patternfly element work is kind of in this hyphen, name of whatever the element is, hyphen its intention. Or if it's a very specific property, if it would be border, let's see if you have any other CSS variables. No, don't have any other CSS variables. So that's just fine. So this is a decent name one for the color of this text, but then it should be leveraged throughout. So one of the, big inflection points with web components is this notion of, hey, because you said that this is a gray box shadow, there's literally no way to modify it. And that's, the pro of Shadow DOM, but also then the negative of Shadow DOM of like, well, what if we put it in a context that's kind of got like a red tint to it? I want it to be done that way. So another way around that is making sure that you have a lot of CSS variables. I tried personally to include CSS variables anytime there's a color that's been dictated or something like this, like pixel based, like very specific types of things. Also, again, personal preference, I'm just putting a space after these things so it's a little more readable when you have multiples. Now, the hover state aspect, let's see how hover is implemented here. Okay, so some things are so we're translating Y whenever we're hovering over the stack, and the stack is down here. Okay, so all right, and that's a good having a default image. That's great. Even if it is that silly Squidward one, that's perfectly fine. Properties, we got the IMG here. Generally, what I like to do, so we're thinking of these as an API, right? So IMG is a decent name for a property or an attribute. However, what we've tended to focus on is like the source. And I don't like using SRC. And again, that's personal preference. Like some people would do SRC as short for source. I like actually writing the word source, and that is the source of whatever the thing is. Now, in a vacuum with this little sum card, Squidward card, whatever it ends up being, not a huge deal. When you've got, we'll say even 10 elements, let's say that you have elements that are video in nature or audio in nature and other ones that are image in nature. It starts to get a little obnoxious to have to deal with the image ones in nature with an IMG and all of the video ones with what? You'll have a whatever hyphen video equals, or whatever hyphen audio equals, or source or SRC. So we try to standardize on whenever there's media or something being ingested from another location, that becomes source. That's a minor thing, but I'm going to actually mock up and make tweaks to this as I go. So source, which then I'd have to make this source, and that's perfectly fine like it was. Now, this image doesn't have any influence as far as, it doesn't matter that you have the text written up about what this is. So as a result of that, I'm going to say that this image has alt equals nothing. This tells screen readers, instead of saying there's an image, the alt equals nothing, it won't announce that. So I'm going to have that there. Wrapper left, wrapper right is fine. Generally, I like to do like this, like camel, either camel case or actually I prefer all lowercase with a hyphen between them. That's not a huge deal. I also like to space this stuff out so it's just a little easier to read. Tab that in, tab that in, tab that in. This TR I'm sure is left over from something else. That doesn't do anything. That's the other nice thing with the code highlighting in here is you could see that. And if you hover, it's like, this is enclosed, right? So you know that it's there's something off about it. So we can trace the stack and the container to there. And this goes here. And so we space these back in order, put those divs in alignment. All right, cool. So again, I like to put a hyphen in those. So I'm going to go up and fix wrapper to be hyphen and hyphen. Cool. Alt. Let's do the same here. Although the paragraph wrapping this isn't a huge deal, because that can be solved by the way something is implemented. It's perfectly fine being done that way. Okay, space that there. Add in. It's not complaining about an extra div, so now I'm wondering, where is this extra div coming into play? Extra div. This is a lot of divs, by the way. Part of the nice thing with web components is we can kind of cut down on some of the hierarchy of bajillion divs, but that is a lesser issue. I feel like we have an extra div. save. It just seems like that's what lines up with all the divs. All right. The other nice thing with OpenWC tooling is auto reloading. So if I save this, it'll reload over there. We can see that here's that I got it lined up correctly. However, my image went away because the demo and the API changed. So this is part of why these become super important. When you make a change to, thinking of the properties as an API, it's important. The other thing is I like to put stuff like this in the demo itself. So I'll close that demo. Here we go. Okay. This is another just personal associated with OpenWC. I don't like that they do this. I don't think this is I think this is confusing or needlessly confusing from a beginner audience standpoint. So what I like to do is I take the demo and I just got all of this usage of pulling in lit HTML. So I get rid of demo. I paste that material back in for what the pure demo, is, and then I put the script in the header there, and so it's a minor reshuffling of the way that this ends up operating, but then it's much more readable as to what's going on here, in my opinion. These don't have to be spans. Usually they're going to be paragraphs of some kind, which is why I said you don't need to wrap it in a paragraph from before. And then I would make these different so that there's a secondary image there. So I guess that's kind of currently, whatever the card content is. Okay, that's pretty cool. Do alt of nothing on that one. And then, so, okay, that's in that slot. It's closed down to here. I also like to space these so that it's more readable. Put BRs in it will attribute. All right, so what shows up in stack versus the other one? So this is stack, and then when I view it, right, what is this one? That is that Nickelodeon universe. So the attributes, okay, so attributes is kind of a confusing name for this. And so is stack, to be perfectly honest. So instead of attributes, currently it's not there. I'll have to see what I did with that. What if we got rid of that entirely, what happens? Nothing there. Okay, and then when we hover, we get that one. Okay, so I would probably take this one. The demo is how other developers are going to know how to make sense of this. So I would probably do it more like this. And then instead of attributes, might make that like front. And then this like details or something like that. Or default and details, something words that invoke like, hey, this is what you're going to see. And then this is like the action or action display, details, additional, something of that nature. So again, treating this like an API, now that I've changed slot here, this is why these names of things are the hardest thing in programming. It's usually true because if we change the connotation of some card, and I know some card is just a silly name, but if we were to change the connotation of this, details and it previously being stack, what the heck is stack? I don't know. So we'll go with front or default and details. Default and details. I think that's easy enough here. So then with the slot, I'm going to say that this is the details one, and this slot is default. A class named H1 is quite confusing. So we're going to say default display. Space there. Font family is definitely an area where we would want a CSS variable, because otherwise someone from a design perspective is going to come in and be like, I don't know why the heck I can't change that. So now we can't even use it, or they just fork it and do something else. There's certainly a lot of debate around whether or not everything is primed for forking or whether it's primed for actual reuse. So text, that one's IMG, that's fine. So I'd probably do something like var, and then for the name of that, it would be like some card hyphen font family, right? So I'd do the entire attribute in question here, and our default value is going to be that one then. So then anywhere that we do font hyphen, let's see that that's not applied anywhere else. Anywhere we would do that, right? And now, because of we do get that cascade within this element itself, so I could move this up here. One thing though with the host selectors to keep in mind is you can set whatever these values are and they will pour through. So like I could set color or font family on the some hyphen card tag itself, and that would roll through. So for example, if we were to take this some card text color and we go up to our demo and we do some hyphen card, right? Now in the thing above it, I can do something like this. I'm going to do something wonderful. So now we can try to get a look at how that would influence it. And we see that color isn't used anywhere. So, all right, we're going to look at the way that these are used. We're not going to set a source as our default value at all. We'll just go with nothing. And then in the implementation of this, we'll do source equals, right? So that we still get Squidward there. Pouring that coffee. Oh, coffee is so good. And then, okay, we're going to go. We do still want a default of some kind, even if it's nothing. I do like setting that. Okay. Stack. We can also get rid of these paragraph tags because details could just be implemented as a, someone pulling in the paragraph in question, which is good because that way we have the consistency with this one too, right? We don't have paragraph wrapping that, but not wrapping this one, which could be confusing to someone implementing this as to why one was picked over the other. Now, you do have this stack hover and over the paragraph in question. You don't really need that level of specificity, like the difference between the stack and the dot stack there, in my opinion. It could just all be applied to stack, and it will influence the stuff that's placed there, I think. So let's get rid of that, and we'll get rid of this. Let's see what happens there. Whoop. All right, we're still missing our text here, so what the heck am I doing wrong? Stack, details. That is a cool aspect of this. You can hit reveal and you can actually see, oh, okay, those things are down there, so they are not being applied. Now, what you can also do with this, right, if we did intend for this to be wrapped in a paragraph tag, is instead of it being wrapped in a paragraph tag, we could do stack, and then there's this : slotted, and we could basically say anything. And then anything that is slotted, apply this, right? So it's going to say stack, whenever you hover over the stack, the selector is, we're going to hover state, anything that's slotted, apply this to it. Whoops. Ayo. Okay. So we're still not getting that thing pulled up from the bottom here. We do have our details, and you can see the selector worked, right? So it says color white in this case, and it's transition. We need that applied to the first one. I'll put those spaces in there. Some text color. We got font family is the wonderful Times New Roman. Wrapper left, wrapper right. Spaces on those. Wrapper left, wrapper right. We've got a container. We've got a body. Am I actually missing that div? I did take a div out earlier. Oh, we appear not. We've got the body in the container. We've got stack pointing to that one, to that one. Right, and then we've got this as its wrapper, and that has that wrapper. This has this wrapper here. Image tags are also self-closing. Not that that's a huge deal, but it's worth noting. We've got our slot name details, and then over here we've got slot details, slot default. The other thing I could do, since it's slot default, we'll just make it slot. You can have unnamed slots, and when it's unnamed, it just means whatever stuff that doesn't say to go anywhere else, it goes in there. Okay, so space this one out for readability. Oh, I apparently fixed something. I don't think I had this named correctly. So yeah, with the default. Nice. Okay, so now the unnamed slot, things will just show up in there. And now we've got a source on here. We've got our slotted content having that applied to it. Another thing, so in the original, I was going through this, I mentioned there's no way to tab to it. So we can make this tabbable to activate what the transition is. And the reason that's important is so that our users using a keyboard can still get to this additional information and make it visible. So anytime you have display, let's see. Oh, so I believe this would technically be in there. Anytime you have display none, that is effectively going to hide it from a screen reader roaming through this. There are a lot of users that use a keyboard without a mouse, just in general, or use alternate forms of input. So it's important to take into account those types of use cases. So let's see here. Instead of just hover, and this is a combination I like to use in general as a composite, is I do that, and it's almost always the way I write these. Then I do active, I do hover, and I do focus. And we do need to make sure that this thing can actually obtain focus before we bother setting something like this. But the thing that activates the state change, right? And the state change in this case is whether or not it's flipped over. So we could just put like a link wrapper on this. And so if I go to .container, and actually then I'd add it on this too, right? For the state in general, right? So if we did this, right, we'd have active, focus, hover, state. Okay, cool. Now we still need container to be something that can even be focused. And there's a couple ways to do this. One, which is the bad way, is to do tab index equals 0. Now, if I did tab index equals 0, that means we can tab to this item. So now I've got Squidward, and look, I can actually tab to it. I'm hitting the tab key, and it's going to activate that state change via CSS. Another way I could do this, let's get rid of that one, is I could say, well, the container is a link. This is another popular methodology. I'm not saying it's a good one. Now it's a link tag, and now I should be able to, I can't actually in that case. Maybe because it doesn't have a name. Let's see. Nope, didn't get it there. Let's set tab index again, just to be sure. Equals 0. Yeah, okay. I think it's because I don't have a ref to it. Stuff.com. Cool. All right. There we go. Now I can tab to it because it's a link, and the browser would need to be able to tell the screen reader tab to hit these items. So I mentioned I don't like doing it either of those ways. So this is going to be a transition into a quick lesson on how we do what is known as state management. Now, state management is incredibly tricky to get 100% right. So it's really important to focus on getting it right in these little tiny scenarios because they have huge consequences as you build out applications to bigger and bigger scale. So I don't, and when I'm defining a state management here, is there is some magic to this element that we can do a thing. Right? So because we can interact with this in some way, and even just for this little transition, right? I need to say, how would the card know that it is in a show the details mode, right? So if we just rely on CSS and the user hovering over the thing, there's no way for the card to be self-aware that it is being hovered. And that isn't super important at first, but what you want to try and shoot for in any of these is that every state of the element can be activated somehow, even without user direct interaction. The reason being, what if we had this card here, and then let's say we had buttons below it, and we said, okay, well, for whatever reason, we're using this card in this context. Maybe we've got a grid of 20 of them as a home page. I don't know why. Maybe it's showing user work. And so we've got this user work. We've got Squidward. We've got Patrick. We've got SpongeBob, Mr. Krabs, all of them. And then what if you had it as almost like a button to switch through a carousel of these and show you the other state of the card? If I clicked a button, how could I influence that card to tell it to do to toggle? Because right now, if I just hover with a mouse, there's no way I can say like, hey, act like you're hovered with a mouse. There's just not a thing. So what we'll do is we're going to add in a connotation of state management. And the way to do that is by adding in a property, mapping it to an attribute, show what the difference is there, and then you can actually activate the attribute to trigger the property to make some change. Now in lit element, this is mapped to the updated lifecycle. In vanilla JavaScript, it's called attribute changed. And so you can actually tell your web component, here are the attributes to pay attention to. Whenever any of them change, run this function. And so that allows you to make your web components reactive, that the user can influence them in a data layer way or by hovering them, whatever, and it actually invokes the change. So we're going to get into some deeper hooks as a result of this, but let's start with the property. So we need some property that implies that this is active. And so I'm actually going to call it active. And this is going to be type Boolean. And I'm going to do reflect true. Now, what reflect true means is that we can leverage that value in CSS. You now get it as a selector to do something like this, host active. And that means whenever someone writes active on the web component, this CSS will apply. So this is a very simple trick to do a bridge between user input, data reactivity, and visualization. So what I want to do is, instead of all this active hover focus stuff, I want to say when the element is active, then do this stuff. And we're going to leverage JavaScript-based events to imply these other things. So I'm going to take that :host active. We are going to apply it here to say, when we are active, do this to the container, so that it's no longer based on some CSS event associated with the user just mousing over or activating something via link. So now we'll look for other things that say hover. Okay, stack has the same thing with hover. So we're going to say the same thing there, right? This is going to be an absolute just toggle the way that this is influenced as a result of being active. So we're going to do it on this one too. All right, so I shouldn't see the word hover anywhere. I shouldn't see the word focus anywhere. It's usually a decent sign. Okay, so how do we actually wire this up? Well, one, we have to set a default. So we do this.active, and we'll do false in our constructor. Now, we go back to our demo. We'll see I have effectively disabled this thing being useful. However, we inspect it, and now we go up to some card, and we do. Now I got to mess with whatever just made that slide off to the side of the screen. But you can see that now it has data reactivity, right? It's able to actually respond to some property being changed. So let's go to where I have this set as active. When we're active, translate the container 300. Let's see if this, where is .stack? Stack versus the container being hovered. Container hovered and stack. Let's see. How can we unpeg the two of these? This is an interesting problem. I haven't made an element like this in quite a while. All right, let's do hover on both of those. Whoops. And then we need to make sure that this.active equals false. Okay. Okay, so that will pull up the other thing from the bottom. And then we need some card to have active. It shouldn't translate the entire thing over. I think I missed some CSS in there somewhere. Let's go back a second. To translate. It's not supposed to move the entire content. What did I have written here? Oh, I see. Okay. All right. I accidentally deleted IMG here. So the translation should only happen to the image. Like the active state shouldn't do that. Okay. So now let's go back, and that was working. I just screwed up the CSS. Okay. So then we've got stack. The other thing is I like to try and group these based on what's happening. So we take this stack portion and say like, okay, well, there's stack. Whoops. There's stack, and then there's the content slotted underneath stack, right? So this is kind of your, and it's even helpful times to leave a comment, like default state, right? And then this is activated state on the slide up or something like that. Just so that, again, you're trying to make this so that someone else coming to this fresh eyes goes, oh, that's what that does, and can decipher it without having any idea what the mental model was necessarily. So, okay, and we've got wrappers, text, all those things. Another way that you can do this, just from organizing standpoint, is maybe all the stuff that is the default way this operates is in one area, and then all the stuff that has to do with a state management type of a thing, in this case active, maybe that all goes at the bottom. So this is our default state, if you will, of the element, and then down by the bottom, I'm going to kind of block this off. And we'll say that this is also activated state for the element display, something like that. Okay. So now we've got those classes down here. I know that when we're in an active state, we're going to do these things. And now when I go back to my card and we say active, we get the same thing, right? So again, now this is something I could pair to like a button. I could click the button and it could trigger the active state. So let's do that before we do the other thing. So what that would look like in some just vanilla JavaScript, and it's easy enough to throw something like this on the page, is maybe we would have a button and it'd be ID equals me, and then it would say click me. And what we would then do is say document.get element by ID, click me, add event listener, click, and then we do, whoops, that arrow. So what we've got queued up here is when this page loads, do a document.get element by ID, which is the built-in selector, find click me, so it's going to find that ID, add an event listener to it, which means some user interaction is going to happen. The interaction we're looking for is clicking, which also gets responded to with like an enter, like if you tab to it and you hit enter. So that's important to note. And then, okay, then we know we're going to get back an event. Anytime there's an event listener, you're going to get back an event as its response. So this little loop you can think of as applying some interaction to the browser. So if we start this as stuff and save, now there's going to be a click me button. Oh, it's floating up there. Let's put some absolute positioning on this or something. Let's do button tags, get bottom 0, left 0, position absolute, just so it's easier to find the page. There we go. You can see, even in trying to build a demo, sometimes you have to fight with CSS and things. Hey, there it is at the bottom right. All right. So now when I click this, it says stuff. However, what we're going to do is, instead of alert stuff, we're going to do document dot query selector all, which is a pretty generic one. Or actually, we'll see if that's available. All right, dot for each item. Let's see if we can do, I don't think you can cast it this way, but console.log item. Oh, it actually selected the card. Okay, so it selected the card and it ran through each of them. Why that's important or interesting is we can do sum card, and we'll make another sum card, and source on this one will be just this PNG. And then inside the card, we will just have a paragraph that says stuff. So now we've got 2 on the page. We're going to have to mess with some of the CSS to make sure that those show up appropriately. But now when I click the click me, I get access to both of them. It's going to hand me both. So what we can do in this loop now, instead of console.log item, we're going to do item.active equals, and this is going to be a weird one, not item.active. So what that's going to do is it's going to look at the active property on the elements. And as we look in here, right, we've got our properties. We've got active is a Boolean, and we need to make sure this is set. This dot active equals false. So it's going to be false to start out with. However, whenever someone clicks on the click me button, actually we'll change this to toggle me, toggle button. So whenever someone clicks toggle button, it's going to search the page, find all of the sum cards, go through and run this against each of them, take their dot active status, right, which is going to start at false, and then set it to not the active status, which in the case of a Boolean, if something is false and you say not false, it's true. If it's true and you say not true, then it becomes false. So this is a nice little one-line cheat to basically be able to flip something back and forth. So let us go to here and we'll hit toggle button. And now we can see that we're able to external to the element activate that occurrence, which is pretty cool. So what we'll do now is we want to be able to do this internal to the element, right? Because we lost our ability to do hover state, even though we have this toggle button. But this is what we're talking about with reactive data and state management. Something should be able to talk to that card and be like, hey, card, I need you to act this way. And if you can't do that, then it doesn't have good state management. So I believe there's some CSS in here that is telling this to position at the top. Position relative. Let's see if that helps with these. I'm always bad at this part. Hey, there we go. Now they position next to each other. That's all we needed it to do. So we can get rid of that one. We don't need the container to be absolute position in this case for this to work out. So that then we get a nice, list of these, right? And we can see now that that is also for stack is position absolute. Let's see if we get rid of that, if it works. Nope. So we do need to do position absolute on the things internal to it. Display flex. What else we get to display flex? Nope. Okay, so that's in place. It looks fine there. There's position. I honestly thought position absolute would be fine for this. Oh, there we go. So maybe I just needed to do that. Okay, so we have relative instead of absolute for that one. And what if we did it for stack? Nope, can't do it for stack. Okay, that's fine. So we've got the entire outer wrapper of this in one state, and then we can see as we minimize this and we toggle, right, it activates. And then I know that if I disable that one, it goes back to normal. If I do that one, it goes back to normal, and we can toggle them. Another fun thing, right, I can do that one, and now they're going to toggle independent of each other, right? So that is, again, if you can do things like this to the element, then it has good state management. So now we're going to wire up the original use case back into this, which was that hover state, right? So how do we do hover and active in a way that allows our keyboard to go through the element itself, as well as actually hover over what the thing is? So now, instead of using CSS-based, we're going to do them in the element via JavaScript. So you can, for these specific ones, apply these in the constructor. Generally, you can't do that. But what we're going to do in the constructor is this dot add event listener, and we will do mouse over. Yes, mouse over. And then we will run a function. And actually, instead of running a function, we'll do a little differently. We'll have a unified one. And this is going to be active on event. And then the active on event, we are going to actually name something here, active on event. So you can have a reusable function instead of the other style is called an anonymous function. So this reusable function, then we will do, just like we do the other one, this dot active equals. But for this one, this is actually to activate it on. We are flipping the thing on. And so we will do, so if we hover over, we want it to be true. Oops. True, type, thank you. All right, then if we want it off, right, because we need to have like a toggle it off type of a thing, we can have this dot active off event, and we'll do this dot active equals false. Okay. Now we save. I should be able to hover over and here we go. I hovered over the thing, my mouse went over it, and it did that. So now we need other events. So another event would be need focus in, which is a special event for if you tab and you get focus of it. We need focus out, which is to turn it off. We need mouse over, and we need mouse, I believe it's off, but we can do an autocomplete and see. Mouse out. There we go. Mouse out. And let's verify this focus. See, there's focus in, focus out. Cool. We're going to make sure those are correct. Single quote versus double quote does not matter, but just please stick to one, whatever it is. Okay. So we've got mouse out, which is the equivalent of focus out, right? So we need this to work for the keyboard or the mouse. We'll put these separately. So this is our off event. And this is our on event. So then we need to make these do the active off. Those ones the active on. Now, I'll keep the mouse up there. And the reason it's activating is that technically the boundaries of this element flow over here. If I inspect and we look at the box model, and this is part, honestly, this is part of where box model can become very important. Let's scale this window down so you can actually see what's happening here. If I hover over this, we'll see some card flows way out there, right? Now, if I do body, body flows over there. Container has this kind of figment of like, well, I sort of flow over there. So what we can do is by debugging this, we go, oh, well, container has a width and height, and body is just reacting to what container says, right? But there's no, right? There's stack, there's wrapper left, there's wrapper right. There's nothing in container that would indicate that it needs to be that way. So we should be able to tell container to not have this width of 500. All right, so let's see what happens if we get rid of both of those. So now container, body, and here, let's scale this. Now they're also, right, they're more responsive because we're not saying this is dictated specifically by being 500. And you can also get, you know, good and bad, right? This like Squidward is going to be, there's a nice real estate. But now I can hover these and they activate, or I can hit toggle button and they activate in the same way. So, which is what we're going for with state management. Now to that accessibility issue, right? Because now we've got this down to the point that we can make it reactive. We can add these additional ways of operating into it with state management. And so what we're going to do is we're going to basically say this thing can gain focus as a whole. And that would be this dot set attribute. And the attribute we are going to set is tab index 0. And now I can tab over these. And so I'm hitting the button on the keyboard, which is going to trigger the focus in event, which hits active on. Active on turns on active, and that activates the CSS selector to do whatever I want. And so that is the nice feedback loop of doing an accessibility setting, having the state management in place that you can actually react to that effectively while normalizing it with other modes of behavior. So if this seems like a lot for just a little card, it's because it is. Well, there's a lot of engineering that goes into these web components to get them right. The beauty is, as you get these approaches down and you keep applying these types of patterns, they're completely repurposable. So we just keep this feedback loop of, hey, I need to do a thing, or when you click the button, I need a menu to open. Okay, well, that's state management. The menu has a state associated with active. Oh, well, when active, slide out. The button has a state associated with click, or tying that to the menu, right? It's a lot easier to query and obtain data between things and have them react to each other so that we get this data reactivity with the style intention and keeping things highly accessible in the process. So I will, I'll post up a PR of what this is. I want you to try and take it to the next level with the color settings, implementing simple colors, which we can, help you work through for sure. But that is effectively tiptoeing into state management. Love this CSS transition. Don't know where this came from, or if you've applied this before. It's really cool. So I will post this up and look for more of these. If this was useful, I'll keep doing them. If not, I'll keep working on hacks. So thanks for dropping in.